friends, I'm Sabrina, the rookie around here. John and Dick are the old school American fans of F1. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation the guys and I had about the F1 calendar. I knew that longtime fans like John and Dick have strong opinions about the calendar. They didn't disappoint. As you'll hear, it's a traveling circus that covers the globe. Hope you enjoy our conversation. John, Dick, both of you have watched Grand Prix for years. What do you think about this year's calendar, its length? Do you think there's pros to it, cons to it? Why? I'm going to have you go first, John.
Well, I thought it was too long to begin with, but then they canceled China, so I'm now a little agnostic about it.
Wow.
I'm a little sensitive about the length of the calendar, just generally the number of races, simply because I've been around enough series to see the demand that it takes on the team, not so much on the drivers, although that's pretty tough. But the team, you know, they get very, very little time, and it's very, very hard on them. So I'm not a big fan of the, 20 or so races. I think they got to keep it relatively short.
Wow. So how much shorter would you like it to be?
I think 17, 18 races is plenty.
Wow. That is, like, for many people, I think probably the minority opinion. It seems like most people would want it every week if they could.
Well, there's a rationale there too.
Right.
The rationale would be that it's so expensive to put one on, 25 million or so probably US to put one on, just for the sanctioning fee. So you could, if you capped it at say 18 to 20 races a year, you could alternate some of the venues so that you could actually increase the venues without killing the team's, families and the team workers and drivers, and spread the sport further afield without overdoing it.
Okay. That's so you're saying, like, concentrate it into specific places that have really shown their quote value as to a racing circuit and what it brings to the table for the calendar.
Well, there are certain courses that I would keep as traditional courses, like Monaco, Monza, Spa, places like that. But then on the alternating calendar, I would put places like Vietnam, India, South Africa, even say Canada, Mexico, maybe even America, although I just don't think that's the right thing to do it. But certainly some of the Saudi Arabia, do we really need 2 races a year in the sand pits? So that would be my suggestion if anybody asked.
Okay, I got more follow-ups, but I want to give Dick the opportunity to join in on this, because I don't know if he's going to join you or if he's going to be the prevailing majority opinion. I get the sense that the F1 world has.
So, okay, so I hear exactly what John says, and certainly having run a racing team myself, man, when you have even races every 2 weeks, it's a lot. And those were, regional kind of programs that I was involved in. And so it does take a toll on the teams, even though the teams are better equipped and they have logistics and all that. I mean, it's one of the things that I always say is that everybody talks about, the technology and having the best crew and drivers and all that kind of stuff. But, it's really like the old saying, an army travels on its stomach, right? And logistics is a huge deal in any form of motorsport because it's a traveling circus. And so there's a lot that goes into that, and you have to figure out the logistics and, swap out team members who are, who've been traveling a bunch and let them stay home and work at the factory or something like that. Having the rotating races, I think if I were to be a race promoter, I would say, well, how do I build data equity if I know that I'm only going to get a race once every 2 or 3 years, right? That's the other side to that. I don't disagree with John's idea. I think it's a good idea, but I think you get pushback from the promoters because of the date equity thing. And then, you look at another series like a NASCAR. Well, shoot, those guys, they run 32 races a year, and they're pretty much every single weekend starting in mid February, and they'll skip Easter and they'll skip maybe Mother's Day. But I mean, other than that, I mean, it's every weekend. Now, they don't have the travel, all the way around the world. It's just, largely in the southeastern United States, not completely, but it's a grind, man. And they do that by swapping out team members. I'll just add one final thing, and that is that if you think about the current F1 grid, just the drivers, okay, I can only come up with 2 of them that are actually married, have a family. The rest of them, they're all single. There's a reason for that, and so I think, part of it is that, some of these guys are, 21 years old or whatever, and probably have no business being married. But the other side of it is, 10% of the grid's married. It's a really low number. So, and the travel certainly inhibits that kind of thing. So, if you're married with kids, Formula One's probably not the place to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, even if we look outside of the drivers to the rest of the paddock, how many of those people are married and have those responsibilities that they're trying to juggle, which leads me to a different conversation. I can't remember her last name, but she's now a new contributor to Sky Sports, Bernie somebody. She was strategist on Aston Martin, and she was talking about one of the reasons for why she decided to step away from being a part of a team and going into the commentary world, and the toll, as you guys are pointing to, and she wasn't the driver. So I can see that. Okay, so we can come back a little bit to the circuits and which ones we would, or the toll that this takes and the calendar length. But you guys already said, I think it was John, you said you would keep something like Monaco, Monza, Spa. I'm getting the sense that those are your favorites. Maybe I'm wrong, but for both of you, which are your favorite circuits? And I'm going to go to Dick. You go first. Tell us your favorite top 5.
Top 5. Okay. Spa, because Eau Rouge is just crazy. Monza, because the fans are insane. Silverstone, because of tradition. To think. Suzuka, because of Senna's qualifying lap there in like 1988, 1989. And maybe like Singapore. Monaco doesn't make my list because you can't pass. Now, I love the watch qualifying at Monaco because that's a bull in a china closet going around that track, and it is absolutely dramatic. As a race, not so much. Whoever gets in the lead pretty much controls the race.
What about you, John?
My list would go Monaco, for reasons that I'll get into. Monza, because of the what's the name of the big curve, double apex, humongous curve, Curva Grande or something. Curva Grande. Spa, certainly, for exactly the same reason. Eau Rouge is just fantastic. I miss the Nordschleife in Austria, but that one's gone. I actually rate Coda very high, simply because it is one of the very best places to watch a Grand Prix. But Monaco, I would go back on that one and say it is a lousy place for the race. The problem is you can't pass. That's true. Qualifying is just magic. The other thing about Monaco is it's just everything that Formula One really ought to be. If you go there, you just cannot help but be impressed with everything: the sights, the sound, the colors, the people, the cars, and then there's the race cars, and everything is just magical there. And the year I was there was the wettest year, and when Senna and Prost were battling and Ickx threw the flag in favor of Prost early. So it was controversy as well.
Wow.
There always seems to be controversy there. Think about Checo, think about Schumacher. There's just all kinds of things. But after the race, it's one of the only places where you can get in a tour bus or a street bus after the race and drive around the course.
Right.
Immediately after the race. And then, the Principality of Monaco is really a pretty small place. But at the end of race weekend, I mean, there's like 1 million people crowding into the train station trying to get out of there. And it's just magical. But Spa, Monza, all of those are really historic. But COTA is one of the very best tracks and the best facilities for watching a race.
Well, I'm a little excited about that one because it's our home state. And I think that it's everything. Last year, especially, I loved watching the race. It was, I think the weather, the inclines, watching all of that was wonderful. But let me ask you this question. You just said one on your list, John, that's not on the current calendar. Tell us about that. Why is that one that's no longer on? Why is it no longer on the calendar, from your opinion? And then why did you love it so much?
It's old. It's still open. People can drive around it, but it's the track where Niki Lauda almost lost his life. It's the track where Tom Price did lose his life. It's 14 something miles long. And it has jumps. I mean, a Formula One car in the 60s and 70s would go over the hill and be airborne, all four wheels off the ground. So it was spectacular racing. The other thing about it, which is still true of Austria, the race there.
Germany.
I'm sorry, Germany. Yeah. The weather is so changeable because you're in the forest there, and it just creates all kinds of drama at almost every race, simply because the weather changes and the drivers have to adapt, and you get into a situation where the driver really makes the difference because the car is set up one way, and if the weather changes, you can't change the setup once you're on track.
Interesting. That is very interesting because and why is it no longer on the schedule?
Too long, too dangerous, too old.
Do you think that could ever change? Could it ever come back?
No way.
Yeah, it's too hard to marshal. Yeah.
Say that again, Dick?
Yeah. Well, it's too long to marshal and protect adequately. I mean, it's because I think it's 14 miles long and 200 corners or thereabouts.
Did you say 200
like John
corners?
said, I mean,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, there were guys like a Jackie Ickx who was known as a ringmeister, right? He just knew that place like he could drive it with his eyes closed practically. And they had massive advantages because it was just so much. And yeah, I mean, it was just an amazing, magical place, but it's so dangerous. I mean, it's still open. Like you can go and take your rental car, fly over to Germany, rent a car and go drive, the North Circuit of the Nürburgring. And it's just sort of like people kill themselves there every year, it's just crazy. I need to go drive that place, by the way.
I'll go with you, Dick.
I know, right?
Okay, so then let's look at it the other side then. The calendar has circuits that are on, I don't think any this year are new, right? Everything is a repeat from previous years. Yeah. Okay, so on that sense, are there any that you're not impressed with when you think about what used to have been and now we've increased it to such a volume. They're like, really? We're putting people through this? John?
Well, this will get into a bias that I have, and I know the reason that we have the paved runoff surfaces. The only one that I really like is Paul Ricard in France, and the reason I like it is because they changed the texture of the runoff area so that it is the further off you get, the worse it is on your car. But I liked gravel traps. I just feel like the drivers now have less incentive to be precise. Not saying they're not precise, but they have less incentive to be precise because the cost of going outside the artificially delineated boundaries of the track cost them nothing except their lap time. Whereas in previous track constructions, gravel traps ended your race.
That's interesting. And I was listening to an interview with Jackie Stewart, and he was just talking about during his era and how many people would die at races. And I started to think how that's such a different perspective. And he was talking about the emotional distance that he had in the process of just racing and knowing that someone may have died, and he continues the race. So when I hear you say the gravel trap gave an incentive to actually stay within, it seems like that's just another variation of that, of different eras creating different incentives, and it also affects the way a driving style. Not saying that the drivers today aren't doing a really good job, but I think that's an interesting thing about the Paul Ricard and the paved off surface. Is there anybody else that has that?
Not to my knowledge.
Not that you. Okay. What about you, Dick? Do you have any circuits that you're like, I'm not impressed with this, I don't think it's worth us doing?
I used to kind of think that the track at Jeddah in Saudi Arabia was a bit too much, but now they've made some changes to it so that it's still spectacularly fast, but you're not necessarily, if you go off the road just a foot, you might be able to bring it back on. Whereas before, and I think, John, you know what I'm talking about, it's sort of like, it was like a little bit of like running at Indianapolis where, there is no runoff. It's either track, prepared track surface or wall. And that gets expensive really quick. Certainly we saw it with Mick Schumacher last year. I mean, he wadded the car, put himself in the hospital, and I think the car was a complete write-off, and he had just made a very small error. So on the one hand, I like the fact that it's unforgiving, but on the other hand, I don't like the fact that it's unforgiving. So I always kind of felt that way, but I've kind of reassessed my feelings about that particular track.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If I could just insert two things. One is, I agree. And part of that is the lining of the track with the barriers. And it's largely blind, especially that one section. And I don't like that because you can have an accident and everybody piles in there and nobody knows. And that's dangerous. I don't like that. I drove St. Petersburg, Florida, and in between the barriers like that, and it's really unnerving because you just don't have any visibility. The other track that I would put back on the circuit, Sabrina, just to reinsert this because it came back to mind, is Mossport. Mossport was a fantastic track, as was Watkins.
Yes.
Tell
me a little bit about that.
About Mossport? Mossport is an incredible track. It's in Canada, in between Montreal and Quebec. I don't remember exactly how long it is. I drove it in the 80s. It's where Stefan Beloff crashed and died, but there's the second turn is actually flat out blind. So you cross over the hilltop and you have to be committed to your left-hand turn to the apex of that turn, which is way down the hill and away from you.
Oh, my.
And then you go through the back part of the track, and you go through this dip, and at 100, we were only doing 140. I can only imagine what it'd be in an F1 car.
Only 140.
The compression going through that dip in the track as you head back uphill, and then you go into a hairpin, and it's a first gear turn. So you go from flat out, full compression up into a braking area, and then a quick right hand down into first gear from top. And it's just, it's a spectacular track. Not very great for watching, but a really incredible driver's track.
Okay, that leads me to my next question, because when I'm looking at these circuits, I wonder what perspectives are being weighted in determining whether or not a circuit gets to sit in the calendar. Do the drivers get to have an opinion? Do the teams? Is it all being decided by the FIA, Formula One? Is it all maybe the financial and how much money you contribute, and that gets you the seat on the spot on the calendar? You guys tell me. I'll leave it open. You guys decide who wants to take that.
I think Dick wants to take that.
Well, I'll go first. Yeah, I think who can stroke the check goes a long way. I think they have to prove that, that the logistics, getting them in and out of the circuit. And I don't mean just, like from the hotel to the racetrack, although I think that does play into it a little bit, but it's more like getting, literally airplanes full of cars and equipment and, pit boxes and all that stuff that is required for these flyaway races. I think that they've got to come up with some very good hard evidence that, hey, we can support the circuit coming in and out. And then is it a country where the teams feel like they have interest from their sponsors in being like, normally you have one race per country, yet the United States has three. Why? Well, because the United States is a hugely important market for almost any sponsor that's, on a Formula One race car. So they want the opportunity to be able to wine and dine their most prized, clients or customers, or prospective clients and customers at a high-end event like that. And that's why you got three of them. It's no real big surprise that, they added Miami and Vegas, because that's a pretty easy one to do. Those are both pretty glamorous places to go.
What are your thoughts, John? And you'll get the final thought.
It's a symbiotic relationship for a lot of the reasons Dick pointed out. Also, countries that have public relations problems, like China, like Saudi Arabia, and some of the Arabic countries, they are using the sport to bring the world opinion up in that country, on that country. And so it's a big deal. But ultimately it's money and logistics are the two bigger things. And then the secondary things are the political considerations.
Okay, well, so this has got me thinking, as always, about more questions I want to ask you. I think what I would love to do is sit down and talk about each race, each circuit, actually. Definitely the ones that exist, but also ones from the past. So let's plan for that to be a future conversation. Mm-hmm. We'll wrap up for today. I thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait for our next conversation. That ends this conversation. But rest assured, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just two guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Thanks for listening.